Greetings. Recently, Girl Writes What released a video with the title, Is Feminism Really Dying? Now, I'm not going to be talking about that video, but rather I want to focus on a comment that was left by a certain gentleman. The famous Lord of Kanukistan, otherwise known as Doom Rules, left the following comment. Let's say feminism dies, hypothetically, so what? What about traditionalism and gynocentrism? We still wouldn't have solved the problem. Men are still going to be seen as disposable tools. And that's absolutely true. But I want to refine that and talk about some specific details with regards to utility and male disposability. The relationship of utility, that is being useful as an object, and being disposable. Before I proceed, though, before I get to the meat of the video, I do want to talk about the incredible amount of PM messages, private messages I've received in the wake of the new series Perspectives. I've received at least 14 that I can think off the top of my head, and it's been a pretty overwhelming response. I've seen all of them. I have not responded to all of them by any means. And that is because, we all have lives. I do have a life outside of YouTube, at least in terms of the things I need to work on and things I need to do. And so I just haven't had the time to respond, and I just don't have the time at the moment to respond to 14 different people and every day knock something out. That just doesn't work. I will eventually get to everyone, or at the very least respond to everyone, but one thing at a time. This coming week, I have at least one Perspectives thing planned, which should probably be about Poland, the first Eastern Bloc European country, and I'm very much looking forward to that. But I will get back to all of you, including you, Doom's Rules, on the state of Kanukistan. But it's been a lot. So happy about the positive reception. Not so happy about the limitation of only having 24 hours in the day and my own time limitation. So with that said, let's move on to the meat of the video. Now, two things I want to just talk about here. The first thing, let's talk about traditionalism. I think we as a MGTOW community have, by and large, rather poorly defined traditionalism. When people talk about traditionalism, I guess the image that comes to mind most often is that sort of 50s image, right? Roughly an image spanning 15 years, if we're generous, basically from the end of World War II, 1945, to 1960-ish with the onset of the pill. And Coltrane released another fantastic video that I urge you to check out on that topic. But, roughly 15 years, if we're generous, of a kind of technologically empowered traditionalism, when everything was fine and 2.5 kids. And sometimes some people refer to that as traditionalism or as a golden age. But when we really think about it, what traditionalism used to be was a pact of necessity. That is, if you wanted to pass on copies of your genes as a male or a female, a pact of necessity born of a very harsh environment that was unforgiving and absolutely required that level of cooperation. Which is to say, if you look at, say, a traditionalist family of the 17th or 18th century, these were not people that were empowered by technology. Of course, the man still had it worse. He was much more in danger of losing his life, often through work and through war and other unfortunate circumstances. But that said, I would argue the woman at that day and age also wasn't exactly having the best time of her life. She was mostly limited to housework, of course, but it was fairly laborious. She had to put in a fair amount of effort, and she was busy quite a bit. If you ever listen to some of the stories Girl Writes What talks about when she mentions her grandmother and so on, it gives you a picture of what quote-unquote traditionalism was. It was cooperation of necessity for the sake of reproduction. There was and that's what marriage was. It was a binding reproductive contract. All of that's changed, of course, but I think given those circumstances, when we talk about traditionalism, we need to be specific. And so the sort of 50s style traditionalism was a tiny temporal snippet in a much, much larger span of time where we wouldn't really recognize anything of the things we saw in the 50s. With that said, the High Lord of Kanukistan's fears regarding traditionalism are, I think, rather unjustified. And the reason being is because, barring the total destruction of civilization and the elimination of all the technology that has come to pass and things that have empowered our lives and made our lives easier, we're not going to be returning to 17th century or 18th century style traditionalism where the man is out in the fields all day with oxen at his behest, and the woman is wringing wet clothing and what have you, and cooking nonstop over a stove. And we're not going to go there unless we destroy civilization, in which case I don't even think we will have traditionalism. We'll have something completely different, something far more prehistoric. So I don't think we really need to worry about traditionalism, at least not from that angle. Moving on to disposability, which I think is a far more complex topic. Most of my long-term viewers know where this all stems from, of course. That is, male disposability, what it means and what it is. But it's always helpful to redefine things and explain their roots and origins. And I want to do that one more time in case you guys get bored. It is necessary for what I'm about to say. Male disposability is a consequence of reproductive reality. The famous scenario that one always offers, and I will offer again, is if you have a tribe of 1,000 men and 1,000 women, and 999 of the women die, well, you're fairly limited in your ability to replenish the numbers. If, on the other hand, you have that same tribe, but 999 men die, but there's one man remaining, he might not be able to provide support to all the women, but he certainly can inseminate them all and get them all pregnant. And you could, in the course of a few weeks, have perhaps all of them impregnated with his DNA. I mean, that's a simple equation. And so it just goes back to sperm being cheap and eggs being expensive. You cannot replenish your population very quickly if all the women die, but you only need one man at the end of the day to do it. And as a consequence, the female becomes non-disposable in the most vital function of reproduction, passing on genes and the ability of population replenishment. And the man, of course, well, he needs to offer something else apart from his sperm. He needs to be good at stuff. We talk about male utility. Well, I think there's an unconscious awareness that most men bring to the table, that they believe, at least, that bringing utility to the table will offset their disposability to a point that they are wanted and needed. And this is instinctual. Think about the man offering gifts to his woman, the man offering his services, fixing the light bulb, fixing the radiator, even cooking in some cases. He's showing his utility, his usefulness, because this is seen and perceived to be, at least partially correctly, as a means of offsetting his disposability, because his sperm is cheap and he needs to be able to offer a little bit more than that. And this is largely true. It's instinctual and it's also taught to some degree. To be a man is to be useful, which is to say you can fix things and you can build things and you can, bicycle in the blizzard so you can pick up the mail and all this other stuff and buying women gifts. Everything the man does in an effort to court the woman, apart from his, natural genetic state of being gifted or not being gifted, I mean, those are just added bonuses, is an effort to show her that he has value in the sense that he is useful, he has utility. But I think what a lot of men don't understand, and this is, of course, what many traditionalists, whether they believe in a 1950s style or the more sort of classical style of say, 17th century joint misery, they believe that showing their utility to women is a sort of a foolproof way of avoiding certain negative consequences, and indeed of completely evading their own disposable status. This is not true. I think there's a kind of tacit belief as well that utility and disposability kind of an inverse relationship, which is to say the more useful you are, the less disposable you are. And that's true to a certain degree, sort of. So, for example, President Obama is the president of the United States, and in some sense he's really useful. And so we want to keep him around, whether you agree with his policies or not. And I don't. But I think it helps, and these are just useful categories I'm about to talk about. I don't claim that these actually exist. It helps to talk about macro disposability and micro disposability. Useful categories of thought, nothing more. On a macro scale, it's true that utility, it can serve as a function of disposability, which is to say there's an inverse relationship to some degree. On a micro scale, it becomes more and more complicated. And more importantly, the individual man can modulate his own disposability in the right context. That is, on the micro scale, he can do that. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But what do I mean by that? Specifically, what I mean is that there are plenty of situations where the man is pretty damn useful, but he's essentially just as disposable as he ever has been. Think about the classic situation of the man who is forced through the legal system to pay child support, who cannot see his progeny anymore. He's basically just a wallet. That's all he serves as. And its only function is as a wallet, particularly in states such as California that have lifetime alimony, to his children and to his former wife. Now, he's not being disposed of as a piece of junk, and he's still being regarded as useful, right? His monthly payments to his former wife and his children that he never sees, these can be deemed as something useful. He is a useful tool. But if we really look at and examine a situation like that, he is fairly disposable. I mean, the minute he might drop his payments or has an inability to pay anymore, he can be jailed. We've seen this happen before. There are a number of cases. Barbara also made a video years ago on this, covering a man in Colorado who was jailed for this. So, yeah, he might not be disposable in a conventional sense, as sort of thrown away, but I doubt he's feeling really good about himself. So this very direct idea of sort of utility and an inverse function to disposability doesn't really pan out on a micro scale, because I doubt he's feeling very good. He's still useful, and he's not being traditionally thrown away to the junk pile, but he probably feels like shit. He's probably miserable doing that. After all, the whole idea of being useful is to, get what you deserve as a man, and that is not being fulfilled in that context. So if we talk about an inverse relationship of utility to disposability in the context of the male, well, yeah, in the most technical, real sense of what people are talking about, that's probably true. Certainly on a macro scale, but on a micro scale, things get a little bit more obscure and a little bit more difficult to classify along those lines. Like I said, in my example I just cited, and there are real examples of that, the man paying his child support for the rest of his life. I mean, yeah, he's still useful. He's offering utility, but he's hardly happy in that context. So, and of course, this has all been afforded by a modern environment, technological advancements, coupled with legislative reform and political reforms that have taken place in the past century. We all know about that. We've talked enough about that. What I want to talk about now is the idea of sort of modulating your own disposability. On a macro scale, in an absolute sense, absolutely, men are by default disposable. We can't carry children, so there you have it. On a micro scale, though, and I particularly think this is true for MGTOW-minded men, we can modulate it to a degree, which is to say, a man is in some sense making himself both more disposable and more vulnerable if he makes certain mistakes in his life. For example, a man who decides to marry a single mother and then has a child with that same mother and then is legally bound in terms of marriage, in terms of obligations to supporting both the child that's not his and his own child, that probably wasn't the wisest decision, particularly in a Western context, but in a general sense, not very smart, and he's putting himself in a rather disposable position. He will be useful to her, and after she decides to divorce him, well, if he can't provide anymore, at least according to her standards, well, he'll continue to be useful. I doubt he'll feel very good, and he will in fact be disposed of. What is divorce after all, other than being disposed of? What is the inability of seeing your progeny than being disposed of? Yes, you provide some marginal utility, but you're still being disposed of. Now, if you're a MGTOW-minded man, you can choose whom you have associations with. I think, to some degree, on a micro scale, you can modulate your disposability by choosing to associate only with people, specifically men, and I'm talking about friendships here, obviously, who are honorable, who have integrity, who realize that you're not just a human doing, as the late man-woman myth stated so famously, and a human being. You can modulate it because as a MGTOW-minded man, you're aware of the realities of human biology. You're aware of how you view women, and you're aware of how women view you. Most relationships, particularly of the romantic sort between men and women, do come down to your ability to provide utility to the woman. How useful are you to her? There are, of course, other factors, such as your own genetic fitness, which are added in. But in, a friendship with a man, that's not the case. And I've certainly found in my life, in sort of modulating my own disposability, in a macro scale, I'm absolutely useless. I mean, I would be the first to be left to die because I have just no skills that would be useful to keeping women alive or probably even civilization alive. And I have no problem admitting that. But on a micro scale, the people I choose to associate with, generally speaking, MGTOW-minded men, have enriched my life a great deal. And I think all of us have a healthy respect for basically for our own humanity and for each other's humanity. That's a profound difference, I think, between someone who's not aware of these things, who hasn't participated in MGTOW and gaining knowledge and wisdom over the years, and someone who has. Now, I've communicated with MGTOW-minded men, content producers, who you can really see how much they appreciate it when you actually ask how they're doing. It's true as men, most of the time, we talk about things and stuff. That's just our nature. I do that all the time as well. But, I relate without any details a tale of, C.S. MGTOW is a guy, I've had lots of discussions with him. I mean, not only is he a fantastic content producer, he's been a great friend to me, and I have just an incredibly deep appreciation and fondness for him, both as a human being, but also as a friend. I feel that my life's been tremendously enriched by conversations with him, and he's just an incredibly fascinating person. The things he can talk about, very knowledgeable. But when I've talked to him, I always got the sense that all of the people in his life, his former wife, and they weren't interested in understanding his psychology as an individual. I think even in his sort of more conventional friendships, I always got the sense that people weren't actually listening to who he was, and I went out of my way to do that, and I always got the sense he appreciated that, and I've felt that on the end of other people I've talked to from the MGTOW community, MGTOW-minded men. I really think that you can, to some degree, modulate that on a micro scale. For the greater world, on the macro scale, that's absolutely just an impossibility. Because by default, you are a function of your utility. On the micro scale, I think you can go beyond that to a certain degree. That, of course, doesn't offer us very much hope. As the Lord of Kanukistan stated, I mean, we can't solve these things unless we completely change our genome and how things work biologically. Nothing's going to change. But I do think we can modulate things. I do think we can improve things in our individual lives. And I do think the key to that, tuning into that human aspect of things, is an understanding how the world works, that is objectively, and then maybe setting that aside temporarily in certain contexts for your fellow human beings, for your fellow men that you form friendships with and actually care about, and realizing that they too are human beings just as you are. And that's something that we can do as men that I don't think is readily accessible to most of the world, and indeed we just overlooked it all the time. So macro scale, yeah, we're fucked, but micro scale, on the individual level, with the knowledge and wisdom that we have gained over the years, I absolutely do think we can improve things, and we can all feel better as a consequence. As I said, people like Coltrane, C.S. MGTOW, Barbarossa, these are all men that have enriched my life a great deal, men that I have a deep respect for and great admiration, and not just for their ideas. They're good people. So, I think we can all learn something from the MGTOW way, if you will. Anyway, I don't want to continue much more on this topic. it's something to think about and something to ponder. In the bigger picture is pretty bleak, but the smaller picture, there are pockets of light in the darkness. So next week, as I said, there will be more content with regards to perspectives and other things. As always, thanks for listening and enjoy your weekend. And as always, may your chosen deity watch over you. Bye-bye.